Thank you. It's always a pleasure to speak to a young audience, but then all of my audiences are young. This is a wonderful conference on 21st century storytelling. And in order to underscore the importance of 21st century storytelling, I was imported as a representative of 20th century storytelling. I was struck by all of the presentations this morning, but mostly by what Caitlin and Lauren had to say about Quartz and all of the innovation it's brought to storytelling. And I thought of the differences between what they do and what I've done. And I find, and I hope you find too, there are some immutable principles that bind us all together as storytellers. Now, I was asked to say at the beginning a few words about myself, but I believe they have all been said, so let me see if I can condense it a little bit. I have a very long resume, only because I've been around a very long time. But I've spent my entire career as a journalist at the Boston Globe, which is one of the best newspapers, digital too, in the United States. And I've been very fortunate in that. Since 1972, when I started there as a student intern, how many of you are journalism students? So when I was your age, I walked in the door at the Boston Globe as a young reporter, and I've been there ever since. I hope the same fate doesn't befall you. But it's been a great experience all along. And I feel like I've awakened every morning, eager to find out what I am not supposed to know, to uncover what the people and institutions we cover want to keep hidden, to expose wrongdoing, to hold the powerful accountable, to write about the plight of those who have no voice but for the voice that journalists provide them. For years, I covered local government, state government, and national government and politics. When I unearthed good stories, people called them what they were, good and important stories. Back then, nobody called me an investigative reporter. I was someone who made life uncomfortable for people in power. I covered 4 presidential campaigns. I covered Washington for 7 years, including the White House when Reagan and the first Bush, I call him the good Bush, were president. I was the newspaper's bureau chief in the Middle East during the first Persian Gulf War. I have reported for the Globe from 33 countries and 48 of the 50 US states. I have been the paper's city editor and metropolitan editor. I ran the Globe Spotlight team for 7 years. I remain at the Globe to this day, but since 2007, my mission in life has been teaching students how to do investigative reporting. So believe me when I tell you this, if I walk out of here today and get run over by a truck, the lead sentence on my obituary will be 6 words long. What a lucky guy he was. I am delighted to be here, not just because of the beauty of Kazakhstan and the warmth of its people, not just because of the friendliness and hospitality of our sponsors from Vlast, not just because of the opportunity to meet so many distinguished journalists, not just because I wanted to fly 15 hours to get here, but because I have spent my life as a reporter, an excavator of the facts. For me, it is for others to be the architects and the builders, to use my facts to construct a view of the world that is clear, that is unambiguous, that is unobstructed by clouds, by mist, or by fog. A view that points at something that nourishes the soul in the same way that oxygen nourishes the atmosphere, and that is truth. You asked me to speak about storytelling. If I am a storyteller, then I have understated my role as a journalist. My specialty is excavating the facts, especially those that are buried the deepest. But of course, I am a storyteller because I have to find a compelling way to package and deliver what I have unearthed. That is why I am here, to talk about my storytelling, to suggest perhaps ways that we can become better storytellers. Because the stories we have to tell illuminate the world around us. Because the stories we tell bring light to darkness, and especially to the darkest corners where journalism matters the most. But forgive me, before I talk about storytelling, I have a story I would like to tell you. We are all storytellers, but at our core, we are seekers of truth. Without the truth, there is no story to tell, or no story worth telling. Without truth, freedom withers and dies. Corruption and autocracy shove democracy aside. As storytellers, we are all warriors locked in a fierce struggle with those who seek to control the truth for the sole purpose of controlling us. They classify the truth as top secret, and they declassify only the lies. The other side in this battle has its major players. Putin is one, Trump is another. You may know of others. They are so contemptuous of the truth that they speak only the language of lies. Masha Gessen, the Russian-born journalist and essayist who writes for The New Yorker, had this to say about Trump and Putin in the New York Review of Books, and I quote, "Lying is the message. It's not just that Putin and Trump lie. It is that they lie in the same way and for the same purpose, blatantly, to assert power over truth itself." In the United States, the outcome of this battle against falsehood has only recently been joined, and the outcome is in doubt. In some other countries, truth has never existed, or if it did, it ceased to. Or if it prevails, it is only because we have fought to make that possible. Earlier this year, in the US, an appeals court judge recognized the importance of truth in this battle. He ruled against President Trump's attempt to keep secret what our government was doing to immigrant families who have fled to America across our southern border because the oppression at home became for them unbearable. And once they arrive, we make them feel unwelcome. We become the oppressors. And here's what the judge wrote. The executive branch seeks to uproot people's lives outside the public eye and behind a closed door. Democracies die behind closed doors. Like some of you, I have devoted a good part of my life to prying open closed doors, to finding the key to gain entry, to coaxing men and women of conscience to guide me through those doors. We cannot find the truth or the whole truth in statements made by government officials. The truth is behind those doors. If we succeed, the locks and hinges are ripped away and the door itself is shattered. It is then that we have a story to tell, a story worth telling. Many of my contemporaries have been quite successful in life. Some of them are even well off, unlike journalists. But they respect us. They understand the important role we play in our societies. They envy us because we have a front row seat on history. And they think we know things that no one else does. But on that last point, they are almost always wrong. We only know what people tell us. Most often, people won't tell us unless we ask. And most journalists, sad to say, are not as good as we should be at asking the right questions of the right people. The world we cover is full of people with important stories to tell, but no one to tell them to. Often they cannot find us, so we must find them. For many years, I have been trying to get better at that. A long time ago, I learned that the people who shout the loudest, often the government officials, get the most attention from journalists. And then there are those who only whisper, but who have something important, something earth-shattering to tell us. But we do not hear them. And often that is because we are so comfortable in our world that we don't think to venture into theirs. Or because the horrors that have befallen them are so unthinkable that we cannot imagine they are telling us the truth, like the victims of the priests. Now let me talk about storytelling, and to do so by focusing on one story, and that is the one about the Catholic Church. In 2001, I was the editor of the investigative team at the Boston Globe. It is called the Spotlight Team. It is the oldest continuous investigative team in the United States. You may have heard about it because Hollywood made a film about our investigation of the sexual abuse of children by Catholic priests. Have any of you seen the movie? Good, thank you. The film was called, as you know, Spotlight. 2 years ago, it won the Academy Award for Best Picture. When I was asked to take over as head of the team, I thought long and hard before I said yes. I liked the job because I could be a player coach. I love reporting and would have been unhappy if my only role was to oversee the work of other reporters. But I was wary about the job because I had to put together a team of reporters, good reporters. The downside to good reporters is they often have good-sized egos. Many great reporters are like little children who do not want to share their toys. So my task was to find 3 great reporters who were willing to set aside their egos and work together. I created a team that was committed to teamwork. I can assure you, without that teamwork, we could not have taken on the Catholic Church and been successful. There would have been no story. There would have been no movie. And I would be home today working in the garden. In 2001, just 8 months after our team started work, the Globe got a new editor. His name is Marty Baron. Since 2013, Marty has been the editor of the Washington Post. Many people believe he is the best editor in the United States. Trust me, he is. On his very first day as editor, he asked about a story the Globe had covered, but not very well. It was about civil lawsuits against one Catholic priest named John Gagan. And the lawsuit was by 84 of his victims, who claimed he had sexually abused them in 6 different parishes over 30 years. He denied it. The Cardinal Archbishop said the church had no knowledge of the abuses. The judge in the case had sealed the priest's personnel records, so it was not possible for journalists to know what the public knew. It was not possible to know what the church knew about this priest's sexual misconduct. In Boston, more than half the population is Catholic. The church had long been a powerful institution, one that no one dared to challenge. The Cardinal Archbishop was arguably the most powerful political figure in Boston. No politician, no prosecutor, no judge, no police agency dared to offend the Cardinal. The same was true to a degree of the journalists, until Marty Baron came to Boston. That same day, Baron called me into his office and asked the Spotlight team to investigate the case of the one priest. Find out what the church knew, he asked me. What did the Cardinal know about what this priest was doing over those years? If you'll pardon the expression, for me, it was what I would call a holy shit moment. I went down to my team. They were as surprised as I was. We had been asked to take on the Catholic Church. But we started from scratch. We had file drawers full of information about political and governmental corruption, medical malpractice, fraudulent schemes, phony land deals, you name it. But we had not a single file on any priest. It was like going to a knife fight without a knife. Our assignment was to investigate one priest. But since we knew nothing about the issue and feared that we might fail the new boss, we decided to take a vacuum cleaner approach to the issue. We called anyone we could find who knew anything about the sexual abuse of children. Counselors, psychologists, lawyers, prosecutors, heads of advocacy groups. Because we cast such a wide net, within a week, we stumbled upon 2 lawyers who whispered to us that Gagan was the tip of a very large iceberg, that the Archdiocese had secretly settled claims by victims of many more priests, that the Church had managed to keep those crimes a secret, and to keep the names of the priests a secret, that the Archdiocese was engaged in a major cover-up. So what began as an investigation of one priest quickly became an investigation of a wholesale cover-up. Because we took that reporting approach, I now think that fear of the new boss is one of journalism's most noble impulses. Within days, we invited a victim to come to our office. His name is Phil Saviano. 5 years before, Phil had approached 2 Globe reporters. He told them there was a cover-up, that the church had hidden the crimes of countless priests, that it was a conspiracy that reached all the way to the Vatican and the Pope. The 2 reporters thought he was crazy, and they sent him away. When we met with him, he gave us the names of a dozen priests he knew of who had sexually abused children. And he put us in contact with other victims who could testify about that. This time we believed him. That was in August 2001. I remember at that time going home and confiding to my wife. I told her we had evidence that the Catholic Church in Boston had covered up the crimes of about 12 priests. That if we could prove that, it would be the most important story I had ever done. Little did we know. By the time we published our very first story 5 months later, we already knew that in Boston alone, over 100 priests had abused children. And no one knew. By the time we finished our investigation in 2003, the number of priests in Boston who had sexually abused children was 237. It would be difficult to name a major institution that is as secretive as the Catholic Church and has to file virtually no documents publicly. Yet we were able to breach its walls. And we did it because many people with very small pieces of this enormous puzzle were willing to help, though most often not the first time we called them. We were able to persuade them to help because we met with them face to face, in some cases several times, before they would trust us with their stories. If we had accepted 21st century communications techniques, email, texts, tweets, maybe something really personal like a phone call, we might still be waiting for people to cooperate. The lesson: the best stories do not come to you. You have to go to them. You have to sit across from people and gain their trust before they will confide in you. We met with victims of abuse. We met secretly with lawyers who had been involved in the secret settlements. One lawyer in confidence gave us the names of 35 more priests. We knew that some of these priests, when they had been accused a few times, were placed on sick leave by the church before being sent to new parishes where no one knew about their sexual attraction to children and where they abused more children. And it turns out that the church publishes an annual directory that lists every parish and the assignment of every priest. So we took 30 years of those directories, and we were looking for other priests who had been temporarily put on sick leave. In the movie, it is a dramatic 2 minutes and 30 seconds. In real life, it took us 3.5 weeks to compile that data. When we were done, we had a spreadsheet with the names of 87 priests on it. Not far from my home, in a suburb close to Boston, was a mansion owned by the church. They once sent priests there to dry out, priests who were alcoholics. We found out they were using the mansion to hide priests who had abused too many children. But who were these priests? I went to the town hall and I asked for the list of voters who were registered at that address. And I found that 10 of the priests were civic-minded enough to leave a paper trail at town hall because they had registered to vote. That was 10 more priests added to our list. I mentioned the secret settlements. The victims and their lawyers went directly to the church. Everything was done in secret. They did not go to court. Where if they had done so, there would be a public record of the allegations. But we wondered why none of the victims had filed civil lawsuits. That made no sense to us. So we searched court files by the names of the lawyers. We found that dozens of cases had in fact been filed publicly in court. But when the cases were settled, the church lawyers asked the judges to seal all the records, so no trace of the lawsuits could be found. Back then, virtually all the judges were Catholics, and they went along. Our attorney then went to court and persuaded the judges to unseal all those records. That is not the only way the church manipulated the system. We knew that in the case of the one priest, Gagan, there were incriminating documents in his court file. But when we went to get them, we found they had gone missing. The church had arranged for the records to disappear. For the first 5 months of our investigation, we operated in secret. Our office, by design, was located in a different floor from the newsroom. The issue was so explosive that only 3 senior editors and Marty Baron knew what we were doing. We published our first story on January 6, 2002. It was about the one priest, Gagan, and how all the cardinals and bishops had known for decades that he had abused hundreds of small children, and they had done nothing about it. In one case, he had sexually abused 7 children in one extended family, including a 4-year-old boy. We were concerned that Catholics loyal to the cardinal would picket the newspaper. We thought the phone lines would be jammed with callers accusing us of being anti-Catholic. We were wrong. If you saw the film, you may remember that the film ends with the publication of that first story in a scene where on that Sunday morning, the phones were ringing off the hooks. But the calls were almost all from victims of priests. The phones rang and rang week after week. Our email inboxes were overflowing. Hardly anyone blamed the messenger. Catholics were upset and angry, but their anger was directed at the church and especially the cardinal. In the first few weeks, more than 300 victims just in Boston contacted us. Most had never told anyone what had happened to them. Many told us they thought they were the only ones this had ever happened to. Most had never told their parents or their brothers and sisters or their friends or their spouses. But they all wanted to tell us because they finally knew they were not alone. Within a day of that first story, we were getting calls and emails from all over the country and from around the world. From as far away as Australia, from as close by as Canada, from Mexico, Italy, Greece, France, Ireland, India, South Africa. The story had gone viral over the internet. The internet scholar Clay Shirky has written that the Spotlight investigation into the Catholic Church was the first major investigative reporting of the internet age. From the church experience, we learned that we had spent too many years looking for stories in the wrong places. Like other investigative teams, we had typically focused our fire on governmental wrongdoing and official corruption. That is what I call low-hanging fruit. And in Massachusetts, there is a lot of it. We had not paid sufficient heed to the less obvious, victimized populations, people with whom journalists have little in common who get run over by society, those who have no voice but for the one we can provide. And we don't have to wait for a whistleblower to alert us to those stories. All we need to do is look around us. And the biggest lesson we learned, we do our most beloved institutions no favors when we give them a pass. We owe our most beloved organizations the same skepticism and criticism and scrutiny that we bring to bear on other powerful institutions and individuals. In that year, 2002, we published more than 600 stories, and 900 by the time we finished in 2003. The story spread like wildfire, and it continues to do so, with revelations in almost every state in the United States and in many other countries. To this day, it continues. And there are many countries, I cite Latin America as one example, where the line between the government and the church is so close that prosecutors have been unwilling, and journalists have been unwilling to look into this. The story, in the last 2 weeks, there have now been calls for the Pope to resign because priests continue to abuse children, and bishops, archbishops, and cardinals continue to cover it up. In Australia right now, Cardinal George Pell is on criminal trial, not for covering up the abuse, but for himself molesting children. In the United States, the Catholic Church has been forced to admit that nearly 7,000 priests abused children over half a century. At least 50,000 children have been identified as victims. The actual number of victims is probably some multiple of that. But there are believed to be another 4,000 American priests whose cases remain hidden. The anger within the Catholic Church and the infighting at the Vatican has now led to talk that there might soon be a schism within the Catholic Church. It is perhaps the gravest threat ever to the Church's legitimacy. And all of that because an editor was curious and because reporters happened to find people who speak only in whispers. Thank you.
Спасибо. Спасибо Волтеру. Мы вчера обсуждали, пока он надевает наушники, он меня не услышит. Уже услышит. Мы вчера это обсуждали, что мы вдруг поняли вчера утром, что мы находимся в одном городе с Уолтером Робинсоном. И нас это так потрясло, потому что, он, правда, легенда, вы это только что в этом могли убедиться. У нас небольшая сессия вопросов и ответов. Как и до этого, пожалуйста, если есть вопросы, сейчас я встану в зоне без света, да? А включите, нажмите на кнопку.
Алло. Вот, отлично. Здравствуйте. У меня такой вопрос. То расследование показало нам, что СМИ являются грозной силой, которая способна отправить в отставку даже самого архиепископа. И теперь в наши годы какая-нибудь редакция способна на нечто подобное, или все же влияние СМИ как-то убавилось по тем или иным причинам? Спасибо.
didn't understand the question.
He did.
Could you repeat that?
Так, я хотел сказать, то расследование показало, что СМИ является действительно грозной силой, которая может устроить некую революцию, способна отправить в отставку даже самого мистера Бернарда. На сегодняшний день какая-нибудь редакция способна на нечто подобное? Или все же влияние СМИ как-то поубавилось, то есть спало?
Well, now I get the question. I apologize for not getting it earlier. The fact is that traditional media, certainly in the United States and in many other countries, has, as you may know, fallen on very hard times. The internet, which has given us so many more tools and ways to do good journalism, has robbed us of much of the revenue that we had. So at the Boston Globe, which still has a large newsroom of 230 journalists, we had 550 journalists 20 years ago. So, but we still do a lot of investigative reporting, but I can't stand here with a straight face and tell you that we can do now what we did then. At too many newspapers in the United States, government agencies no longer get covered. So if we don't cover City Hall and a whistleblower wants to tell us about corruption, who does he call? And this is a problem not just in the US, but in many places. So therefore we have a public which is much less informed. We have people much less interested in getting involved in government because they're much more ignorant about what's happening. So, but it is true that on major stories like this, that we can still marshal enough reporters to get at it. I mean, no newspaper today would ignore a story like this. And this is a story that has now so much momentum that it's not going away.
Еще вопросы?
Да. Ой. Здравствуйте. Я тут.
You have an advantage over me. You can see me, I can't see you.
Я тут. Хотелось бы сказать спасибо за ваше выступление. И мой вопрос заключается в следующем. Когда вы делали это расследование, и вы и ваша команда получали письма от жертв насилия, что вам помогло не разочароваться в этой жизни, что вам помогло продолжать эту работу, то есть не сойти с ума, ведь это очень тяжело психологически быть тем самым человеком, кому все эти сотни людей признаются, рассказывают свои истории. Это очень тяжело, мне кажется, эмоционально, психологически не выгореть. Что вас держало? Спасибо.
I'd like to say it was alcohol. But that's a serious question. Thank you. It's a serious question, and it deserves a serious answer. This kind of reporting, so-called trauma reporting, is very difficult for journalists. I can't tell you, I've covered a war, and I fought in a war in Vietnam. And I can't remember a story that I've ever been involved in where I cried after talking to people who had this horror inflicted on them. We all did. It was particularly personal because you understand all four of us on this team were raised as Catholics. So our values came from these very same institutions whose leaders were allowing this to go on. It shook us all, and it still does. I mean, when you think about it, I can't think of a story I've ever been involved in where the difference between good and evil is so broad and so deep. And all the evil rests with the Catholic Church. It's devastating for many, many Catholics. And I do not call myself a Catholic anymore.
Есть ли еще вопросы? Давайте.
Thank you for emphasizing the truth in your speech. I'm in the back. And my question is, what do you say to journalists who work in countries and circumstances where speaking the truth is risky and it can lead to imprisonment and maybe even assassination? Thank you.
It's not what I say, it's what I do. I genuflect in admiration to journalists. I was at an investigative journalism conference in Kathmandu 2 years ago, and there were 400 journalists from around Asia. And most of them, including about 20 from China, and most of them from countries where there is not really a free press. Sometimes there's a pretense of a free press. And yet they were all there to learn investigative reporting techniques. And they were all committed in their society to pushing as much as they could, as far as they could, to use good journalism to affect change, however slowly they had to do it. And we take no risks in the United States, even with President Trump. We take no risk doing journalism. But in so many countries, to do good journalism puts your livelihood and sometimes your life in jeopardy. So I come away with great admiration for journalists in other countries who push that envelope day in and day out, not without risk.
Да? Здравствуйте, спасибо вам большое за выступление. Вопрос касательно вообще тема религии, она очень конфликточувствительна. И все, что касается у нас в стране ислама, например, да, очень сильно переходит в сторону людей, которые находятся в этой религии. Скажите, пожалуйста, после этого расследования были ли, я не знаю, отказались ли люди от этой религии, были ли люди, которые как-то негативно начали относиться к католицизму, и как это в целом на имидж именно этого течения как повлияло ваше расследование? Спасибо.
Well, overall, the story has been devastating for the Catholic Church. Its moral standing, certainly in the United States and now around the world, is being challenged every day. The Pope himself is now accused of covering up for a cardinal archbishop in the United States for his sexual misdeeds. Many Catholic dioceses in the United States have gone into bankruptcy. Attendance at Mass by Catholics which was way down to begin with, is down even further. People don't give money to the church, and particularly the church has much trouble getting young men to be priests. And this sort of gets to part of what many people believe is one of the root causes of this very high incidence of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church is this rule from the 11th century that priests have to be celibate, that they can never have sex, they can never have a loving relationship, which gives you a pool of candidates that is kind of odd, I think, at times.
У нас еще 2 вопроса буквально. Микрофон уже у кого-то, да? Нет? Давайте. И Адель потом, да.
Спасибо за ваше выступление. У меня, скорее всего, не вопрос, а и как молодой журналист хотела бы попросить у вас совета. Что нужно сделать и какие книги нужно читать, чтобы стать таким же крутым журналистом, как и вы? Спасибо.
Well, you don't have to work hard to be as good a journalist as I am. The fact of the matter is Michael Keaton is a lot better actor than I am a journalist. But the first thing I would say to you is don't read books. I mean, read books to enlighten yourself, to enjoy yourself, but if you want to be a good journalist, go out and talk to people and get them to tell you their stories. Because too many journalists don't do that. And if you do that, you'll be the best. Work at it. Talk to people, tell their stories, particularly people whose stories may force the government to change. I mean, I think one way in many societies where the press isn't really free, to do good journalism is not to write about what the government officials say, but write about what the policy's impact is on people. It's sort of a little more indirect way of calling attention to problems, and maybe sometimes leads to solutions.
Добрый день, я благодарю вас за вашу историю. Я ее прослушала, едва сдерживая слезы, и думаю, что эти эмоции испытали многие мои коллеги. Не так давно, позвольте, я сделаю одно маленькое обращение, которое, возможно, об этом я пожалею, но не так давно мы тоже были вовлечены, журналисты, волонтеры, просто общественные деятели, в неприятную историю, которая была связана с насилием мальчика. Мы были просто инициаторами, которые решили помочь этому мальчику избежать этого насилия и противостояли той большой, так называемой местной власти, которая пыталась укрыть эти факты насилия. В этот период мы подверглись осуждением, это было неважно, даже преследованием и угрозам того, что всех нас, продажных там, блогеров, или как там нас называли, нужно повесить на заборе за то, что мы там что-то делаем. В итоге мы были все вовлечены в какую-то большую неприятную политическую игру. Директор школы боялась, что это узнают депутаты, депутаты боялись, что это узнает президент. Когда узнал президент и что-то сказал, мы наконец-то смогли добиться того, что дело было передано в суд. Сегодня я хочу обратиться к своим коллегам. Я вас очень прошу, мы можем продаваться в каких-то информационных, рекламных кампаниях. Мы можем продаваться за политику, мы можем продаваться просто за каналы. Но когда речь идет о том, что это насилие одного ребенка или 100 тысяч детей, а мне кажется, это в принципе равно, мы должны всегда докопаться до истины. Все, чего я прошу сегодня своих коллег, докопайтесь до истины, поймите, кто в этой грязной борьбе правдив, кто нет. Очень легко было подменять понятия, объявить там блогеров, оружан, нас какими-то там заказными людьми. Это все легко проверяется. Есть переписки, есть история, как все собрались и решили помочь мальчику. Сегодня мы слышали историю о том, как один журналист, а потом целая группа, как редактор, да, и целая группа журналистов спасли 100 тысяч, а может быть больше душ, изуродованных душ. Я видела этот материал, там сидели взрослые мужчины и плакали. Я вас прошу, все, что касается насилия, не допускайте этого никогда, ни в своей работе, нигде, просто написав, даже по заданию редактора, напишите, что они это сделали специально, чтобы очернить депутата или снять омбудсмена. Я прошу вас, коллеги. А вам, уважаемый спикер, я выражаю свою благодарность и хочу спросить, а как вы были защищены? Потому что католическая церковь — это тоже, простите, большая мафия, как оказалось.
I think the short answer, and my answer should be short because your question was a little longer than normal. No, but it's good. It was good. Is we were protected by the truth. by the facts, that nobody blamed the messenger because we had the documents that proved that the church covered this up. And once you talked about one victim, there's never just one victim. There are always many victims. And once people realize, and when I say people, once parents realize that their children are in danger, then they get angry, and then they act. But we were protected by the truth, and the church lost all of its political and moral standing because of the reporting, and they had no recourse against us at all.
Sir, thank you so much for this, and I believe we need to stop here because we have 3 more. Yeah, thank you.